So I'm going to get into a discussion about the man at Bethesda. So a lot of Christians think that Jesus was scolding this man for just being lazy. He's like, get up off your butt and do something. And do you really want to be healed? Like, do you really want to? Wink, wink. You know, that's not what it's about. Okay, that's the problem with most of the church, is that we think God is a God of the powerful and a God of the competent, when it's the exact opposite. God is a God of the meek and of the poor in spirit. Those who have absolutely nothing. Remember, he who is first is last, and he who is last is first. It doesn't say he who is the greatest, most accomplished man in the world is the highest in the kingdom of heaven. Not the person with the most followers, not the person with the most muscles, not the person who's the warrior. You know, it's about the meek. So when Jesus asked this man whether he wanted to be healed, this wasn't like some snark saying, do you really want to be healed? You're going to have to be expected to do more. That's not Jesus' personality. That's not Jesus' personality. Jesus was just being polite. He was just asking, he's being a gentleman. He's saying, do you want to be healed? You know, like do you want a cup of water? You know, you walk into your house, do you want a cup of water? You want to be healed? Because before that, the angel had to stir the lake in order for the man to enter and be healed. And this was the old covenant. You had to fight and strive to be healed. You had to fight and strive for God's mercy. You had to actually fight for it. You had to actually have money to buy a sheep or a lamb or a goat or a dove and go to the temple and sacrifice it. That would have been a whole week's food. You had to sacrifice it and give it to the priest, and they had to eat. And, you know, that was just the fact. It was unfair, I think. I think God, I've always looked at the old covenant as being a little bit unfair, and I think God wanted it for that particular time, but then, you know, it got to a point where it was impossible. You understand? Because you had to fight in order to get healed. You had to fight for God's mercy. You had to fight. Where after this point, it was Jesus who is healer, which is, you look upon the bronze serpent, you're healed. You know, what is the bronze serpent? Our serpent hangs on the cross in Jesus. Our daemon, our serpent, our shadow, our sin, it hangs on the cross in Jesus. You know, our sickness, our contagion, it hangs on the cross with Jesus. It hangs there on him. It gets punctured into his wounds. So that's the important thing, I think, to understand, is that no, Jesus was not rebuking this man, but he did say, sin no more. That he did say, but he said that to a couple people. It's not just saying, you know, I healed you, now you just don't sin. You know, he says, don't sin anymore lest something worse happens to you. This is true. But I think the fact of the matter is that there was a lot of people who were sinning, and Jesus was just, if he heals you, he says, sin no more. You know, if you're healed by God, just don't sin, because you could have a curse. You know what I mean? So the fact of the matter is, and then of course the man was excited. He went and he told people that he got healed. Was it because, you know, he was trying to betray Jesus? No. He was just excited. If I got healed of paralysis, I too would want to go tell people, you know. I just think, you know, we have to not shame the person who's there that's sick. And I think this is something that a lot of Christians do, is they don't have mercy toward the poor or the lame, and they think that they're sinning. I saw a little girl the other day. It was just a beautiful little girl, and she had problems with walking, but she could walk. And I asked her, I said, do you believe in God? And she looked at St. Jude and said, why are those children sick? Like, why are they there? Because we have St. Jude pictures on our refrigerator, and I just said, because the world's an unfair place, and that's why we have Jesus, is to console us and to be a friend. That's what I told her. I wasn't going to tell her that they sinned because they didn't. I wasn't going to tell her that she sinned because she didn't. That's why a lot of people are doubting, by the way, is because Christians are not showing the kindness of Jesus. They're showing a very troublesome philosophy of take the prey and spoil and win the game. That's not a good philosophy for Christians. It's not a good philosophy, you know, because I mean, like, the fact of the matter is, I just gotta say, you know, I'm not going to tell this girl you sinned because she didn't. She's completely innocent. You know, and then I said, you know, there's a verse in Sirach that says, you know, medicine is a good thing. It's a blessing. Just as I can go to the doctor and get healed, I said yes. Because medicine is a good thing. Medicine is a gift from God. You know, sometimes God heals supernaturally. Sometimes he uses the healing of a doctor. You know, now that's not the Bible, but that's the Apocrypha, which is a lot of good moral teaching, and I think it shows up in some Bibles. Like there's some Bibles like the NRSV or the Catholic Bible that does have Sirach in it, and I think we can be a little territorial and not take wisdom where it is, because these are people who believed very strongly too. People who wrote Baruch and the apocryphal books of Daniel and Esther and Sirach and Wisdom of Solomon. These were very faithful people, and so as people like John Bunyan or Theoman Van Bracht or Ignatius or Polycarp. These are very spiritual people. These are not people that we shouldn't listen to. I'm not saying this is scripture, but it's like listening to a sermon and listening to common wisdom, which I think we need to understand that we need to be merciful. It's blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Which I think, the Beatitudes are the whole of the faith. If you wrap your mind around the Beatitudes, you've wrapped your mind around the whole of Christianity. If you read the chapters in Romans, not just about how we're saved through grace by faith, but how we also have to live our faith in righteousness, which is the last 5 chapters of the book. That's important. In fact, I'd say that's more important, because if you have a heart for Christ, you have a heart for righteousness. You have a heart for mercy and for self-sacrifice, which is something that I think we need to have more of, is compassion. And I think we all have faults, and we need to understand that we shouldn't be judging other people for their faults, because I have faults. We all have faults, and that's just a fact. That's why Christ forgives us, is that we all have faults. There's not a single one of us that is completely perfect. So we need to be diligent to have mercy and be diligent and willing to forgive, and also not blame people for their suffering.